Chapter 10 Linda's Story. Linda was indeed a former smoker, as were all the women. In fact, they all experimented first with cigarettes, then with pot, then with alcohol and cocaine. In retrospect, these experiences were all framed as rites of passage in their minds. All of them stopped with the illegal things when they finished college. They still drink, and Linda had been using medical marijuana for a short while, directly after her surgeries and during chemotherapy. I guess it's my turn, Linda began. She was hesitant, knowing that every time she talked about this stuff, she tended to get overly emotional, often reliving some of it. I hope I don't lose myself in this. Why don't you start off with something fun? Tell us some stories about the kids or something. Beth and Linda raised their kids together at the same schools, the same extracurricular activities, the same clubs, and the same music teachers. Oh, sure, I can do that. You all know I love talking about my kids. She leaned forward, lost in thought, but this time with a happy look glazed across her face. Oh, I have a cute one. We were all outside playing one day, and our daughter went inside and locked the door. This could have presented a plethora of problems. Linda liked to use big words. She had always claimed to be an aspiring writer and had written a few manuscripts, but was too afraid to pull the trigger when it came to sending them off to publishers or trying to get an agent. Linda went on. This is an old story, but Melissa has always been an aggressive kind of kid. Now she's in law school, so that'll serve her well if she decides to be a prosecutor. Her repertoire of happy stories always took her back to when her kids were little. This happened when the kids were little, during my skinny period, and I was able to climb through the dining room window, grab my keys and my child, and go back outside. Just as a point of reference, even today, I don't go anywhere without my keys in my pocket. All four of the girls snickered, each one trying to picture themselves climbing through the window. They were all having their own forms of midlife crises, yet they were all feeling good after going to work on the second round of drinks. Wait, it gets better, Linda interrupted. Later that summer, Danny was outside playing with the kids when my Melissa came running inside to use the phone. She was all afore. I said, Who were you calling? She said, 911. What's the emergency? What's wrong? You guys know me already. I was panicked. I was almost out the door when I heard her tiny voice. The kite is stuck in the tree. Again, a raucous outburst from the women. People in the bar were starting to react with disdain, turning around and making faces. Wait, it gets better. Linda's entire demeanor had changed with the telling of her little vignette. She was no longer wallowing in self-pity, nor was she proselytizing an anti-smoking campaign. My heart skipped a beat because Mel was as sharp as a tack, even at 4. I was sure she had indeed called 911, so I followed her back outside. Danny and Devin were just sitting on the lawn, pulling at the long grass and trying to whistle with it. You know what I mean, by holding between their thumbs the long way and blowing through. Linda was talking so fast, she was off subject. Oh, yeah, so when we got outside, I looked to the west, and just as I did, a city cop car was turning down our block. My heart went straight to my throat, that is, until he drove right past our house. I took Melissa by the hand and knelt in front of her, and then I asked her if she spoke to someone when she called the police. When she said she didn't know, I sat back on my heels and then rolled over into the grass. So nothing happened? Beth wanted to know. Nope, just another false alarm, or I should say, another case of me overreacting. Linda had only recently learned what was important in life. I went through a lot of those moments with my raising my kids. I was a bit of a panic. A bit? Beth didn't attempt to hide her sarcasm. Look up the word neurotic in the dictionary and you'll find Linda's picture. Or at least in parenting, she was the most nervous and worried parent I've ever known. I'm pretty sure they coined the phrase helicopter parent after her. Linda's facial expression grew taut, lips pursed. The more Beth teased her, the more irritated she became. Stop, I wasn't that bad, she protested. She paused. Okay, she let down. Maybe I was, but I've come a long way. I'm not like that anymore, am I? Beth relaxed and a smirk came over her face. Oh, come on, you know I was kidding around. You've come a long way, but you went through a lot to stop doing pole vaults over mouse turds. Beth was trying to give Linda a segue into telling her story. The ritual of talking about their most painful experiences and their happiest moments is what bonded these four women together. Julie wasn't quite sure why she was being included in this ritual, nor could she determine whether it was the alcohol that was making her feel okay about it, or if it were the women themselves. She only knew that she hadn't felt this at ease with herself, much less others, in a very long time. Linda, why don't you give Julie an idea of why you nearly bit her head off about smoking and why you have, as we've recently discovered, come a long way, baby? Debbie, who had just been sitting back quietly, decided to help nudge things along. She wasn't fond of talking about her issues, so she always made the effort to go last in hopes that they would run out of time when they did their annual custom. She'll get to know you a lot better, a lot faster that way. Linda sighed, her upper body and neck tensed and her teeth clenched visibly. Okay, here goes. She picked up her beer and took a large gulp. She only ever drank when she was with her girls. My story starts with the fact that I was very much a panic, my whole life, in fact. Everyone sat back in their chairs except for Julie, who glanced at her watch, noting that they still had 35 minutes before their dinner reservation. She took a sip from her drink and crossed her arms on the table, prepared to listen. When I say my whole life, I mean it, began Linda. As far back as I can remember, my life was fear driven and I was overwhelmingly concerned with my physical well being. There were monsters under my bed. I thought I would get every exotic disease you can think of. I was sure that every plane I boarded would crash. At this point, Linda was talking directly to Julie. Get the picture? Julie nodded as she fully understood Linda's plight. She had never heard anyone verbalize this before, and it was almost exactly how she felt. Her mind was spinning. She tried to focus because now she was intent on listening to this woman's story. Just hearing that part, she was resonating with her, feeling her pain, or what was that word Allie would call it? Oh, right, simpatico. My two kids were smothered because of my own fears. I'm just glad Danny was around to be the buffer. He was somehow able to give them the self confidence I never had. I'm still trying to figure out how I grew up with such a low opinion of myself because my mom and dad were really terrific. Linda stopped cold. I should qualify that. It was definitely a different time to be growing up, that's for sure. Oh, what do you mean by different? Julie asked. The other girls just rolled their eyes. Linda continued. It was a kinder, simpler life. At this point, the other girls were saying the same words as Linda in unison. Nobody had to lock their doors. We could leave the house in the morning and come home in time for dinner, and our mothers didn't freak out. We had no. Linda stopped again and put her hands on her hips. Cut it out. They all laughed because this happened every year. I, however, was grateful for the invention of the cell phone because it's a scarier world out there. If Melissa was 2 hours late and couldn't contact me, I went haywire. Once she had a cell phone, she knew to call me and I wouldn't worry as much. Meanwhile, the kids are out of the house. Mel is living out in California, working for an entertainment company. Devin lives in Florida, working on his doctorate in psychology. Maybe I'll end up as his first client. Julie laughed. I was being perfectly serious. I'm still a nutcase about a few things. I've gotten better, but there are a few things that still really push my buttons. Like what? Julie noticed that she was the only one who was interacting with the conversation. She imagined it was because the other two had heard all of this before. I told you that I was somewhat of a hypochondriac, yes? So I ran to the doctor over every little thing for years. My doctor adopted the attitude of the little boy who cried wolf. You remember that story, don't you? Julie nodded. I was a bit of a malingerer myself. When my brother and I got our tonsils out, he had a terrible reaction to the anesthesia, so he was up all night, kicking and screaming. I, on the other hand, was sitting up all night eating ice cream. Julie felt she should qualify her statement further. When we went home, I managed to stay home from school for 3 weeks, complaining of a sore throat every day, while my brother went back in a week. I get that. For me, it was about true fear of being sick, of dying. Julie never liked being transparent. She seemed to resonate with each one of these women in different ways and found herself letting down her guard. She wondered if it was because she would never have to see these people again, if it was the liquor, or if she just felt at home with them, but she offered up the reason she did what she did. I was just needy. I craved the attention. Never really understood why, but that's what I did. Her words hung in the air. I'm sorry I interrupted. This is your story. No worries. Anyway, when there was something wrong with me, nobody seemed to care. For instance, when everyone in the house had a cold, I kept saying I was worse off than they were. I was sure something else was going on with me. My cough was worse, my fever lasted much longer. Danny wouldn't even take me to the hospital when I couldn't catch my breath. Rachel and Beth reacted. In unison, they echoed, That's terrible. Rachel continued, What did you do? I got into the car in my bathrobe and slippers and drove myself to the ER. Turned out I had pneumonia on top of the flu. They admitted me. Linda was almost boasting with pride as she related this part of the story, as if she had a feather in her cap. She continued, I didn't even call Danny until morning. He had rolled over and gone back to sleep when I told him what I was going to do. I imagine when he woke up and didn't find me in the house, he figured it out. If it had been me, I would have freaked out, but not Danny. Calmly, he called me. My mobile phone battery was near dead, so I told him to bring me a charger and some underwear, a change of clothes for when they discharged me, and nothing else. Did he at least apologize? Asked Beth. Not until I got home. He wouldn't stoop so low as to do it in front of anyone. Linda sat back in her chair. He didn't change either. It was then that Julie realized this was just a side story, because Linda was nursing her beer and lost in thought, as if she were contemplating the final Jeopardy question. Do, 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 do. It was Debbie that was humming the Jeopardy theme. Julie just shook her head. How could she possibly be of the same ilk of these four women? They were total strangers only 1 hour ago, yet she was thinking just like them. She felt like she knew them all her life. Sorry, I went somewhere in my head for a second. Linda sat forward. So, when I found the little lump in my left boob 2.5 years ago, and I tripped out of the shower to tell Danny, I got a typical reaction from him. Nothing. Linda took a deep breath. I was vigilant about doing those breast exams, not because there was any family history or anything. It was because I am and always have been a nutcase. Linda began to wring her hands, always a difficult part for her to get through when she told her story. She had flashbacks and intense emotional reactions to her feelings about her husband. Danny was trying to make light of it, but this time I knew something was wrong. Just like I knew I was very sick 2 years prior, but I had thrown that in his face in several false alarms, as he called them, so I guess you could say I used up my bank of sympathy by then. Tears started to well up in the corners of Linda's eyes, but she was trying as hard as she could to resist wiping them. I immediately called my gynecologist and they gave me an emergency appointment that morning. I didn't even tell Danny that I was going. When I got there, they took me right away. Linda stopped and laughed out loud. Sometimes it's good to have a reputation that precedes you. They knew I would either make a scene or drive the other patients crazy in the waiting room. In the exam room, I only disrobed from the waist up and then began pacing. It seemed like an hour before Dr. Glazer came in. I had been seeing Dr. Glazer since I was a teenager, and he had delivered both my kids. He knew me better than I knew myself. The door to the exam room flew open. What's shakin', kid? Dr. Glazer was lacking bedside manner, but I was used to it. I mean, I had to be a good sport after all the years of his antics. In a way, it was comforting. Hey, Dr. G, I have a lump and I'm scared shitless. Please tell me it's nothing. Please tell me it's just a cyst or something. Please tell me it's not cancer. Whoa, girl, up on the table and open up the gown. Dr. Glazer began his exam. I jumped when he touched me. My reflex to do so was not because I was nervous or scared. I had always flinched during breast exams. He had been doing them on me for over 35 years, but I still winced. Calm down. Does this hurt? He gently pushed on the small lump he had found, the same one I had found. Yes, a little. Does that mean it's cancer? My heart was pounding in my chest. Man, I remember I could feel my pulse throbbing in my neck. Am I going to lose my breast? Am I going to die? Linda, slow down. Dr. Glazer had been through times like this with me before. Remember, I had been through a series of miscarriages before I was able to conceive and hold on to 2 full-term pregnancies, and he knew that making me wait for results on anything would likely cause me more harm. First of all, when was your last mammogram? I think I was due this month anyway. I had put off making the appointment because I was busy with planning Melissa's graduation festivities. Can you get me in right away? Let's do better than that. I'm going to send you over from here to have a sonogram of the lump. He was unusually serious, which was extremely disconcerting for me. Linda had to take a breather from telling her story. She made the T sign with her hands and slumped back into her chair. The rest of the women did the same, although they were all hanging on every word. Julie found that funny because they all knew the whole story, and the outcome must have been good because Linda was still with them to even tell the story. Once she was able to get her attention, Julie waved her hand backward toward the server and then made a circular motion with her finger. She assumed the server would understand she wanted another round for the table. That's what Morty always did when he wanted to order another round. Apparently that didn't work, so while the group enjoyed their respite, she asked the question, "Is everyone ready for another?" They all nodded as the server approached the table. "Ready again?" "Yes, please." Julie asked the girls how soon they would be ready for dinner and then added, "And some menus, please." Linda sat up abruptly. "Let me get through this. You already know the outcome. The journey itself is what had the most impact on me." While the rest of the girls got comfortable, she went on. "I went through the sonogram and the biopsy without ever telling Danny and the kids. I figured I'd get a lot of 'don't worry, it's probably nothing,' or 'stop panicking because medicine has come a long way.'" Linda was talking in a monotone. Julie took note that the other women were totally absorbed, as if this was a brand new story. She found out that it was. Debbie was the first to ask, "You mean Danny knew nothing until the biopsy came back positive? I can't believe you did that. Who did you talk to about it?" Debbie found this incredulous, knowing how codependent Linda had always been. "It was time for me to grow up." Linda sat straight up. "My dad had passed away already 10 years prior, and my mom is just like me, so I couldn't upset her until I knew what the prognosis was, so I sought the help of a survivors group right there at the hospital. The oncologist suggested it. At first I begged off, but after several nights of panic attacks and anxiety, I gave in, called them, and went. Best move I ever made." After another deep breath, she began again. "They convinced me to go to a therapist, too. I did, and that was worth its weight in gold." Wow. Just wow. That's all Rachel could say. She had known Linda for nearly 50 years and never thought she would seek the help of a mental health professional. She had been amazed that she told this stranger that she was a hypochondriac, but this was more than she could handle. "Why didn't you tell us any of this before?" "I wasn't ashamed of it, if that's what you think. I just wanted to see it to fruition first. You see, I'm living outside of my own head these days. Well, I should qualify that. Most of the time, I'm living outside of my head. I sometimes get a little overwhelmed. You know, like I just did about the cigarettes." She turned toward Julie. "I'm sorry again. What other people do is none of my business. I just ask that you don't smoke around me. At any rate, when I got the results and the oncologist scheduled surgery, I told Danny and the kids. I waited until the surgery was over and I was almost finished with the chemo before I told my mom anything." The three friends nodded knowingly while Julie was stunned. "Oh, come on. You mean to tell me your mother didn't know something was wrong with you?" Julie was in awe of this. She pondered her relationship with her own mother and added, "My mom is like a witch. She can tell right at hello when something is going on in my life." Linda didn't have that luxury. She and her mother were estranged for years. "My mother is caught up in her own mishigas. Her first thought is always about how things affect her. She wouldn't likely even come up from Florida if it meant getting in the way of her plans, so it really didn't pay to tell her anything." Linda was able to dive right back into her story without missing a beat, which saddened Julie. She disengaged from the conversation for what she thought was just a few seconds. "I guess I should be grateful that I have a mother that gives a shit. I don't know if I could go through something like breast cancer without my mom. She has always been my rock. Through everything I thought I could never survive. She was even there when the girls ganged up against me about silly things, when I felt I couldn't stand up for myself. She had always been in my corner. It never dawned on me that other women didn't have close relationships with their mothers. I guess I'm more blessed than I imagined." "Hey, are you still with us?" Beth flashed into Julie's thoughts. She had noticed a glazed look overtake their new friend's face. She rested her hand on Julie's arm across the table. "Hey, yo, Linda's winding it up and we are getting ready to order dinner. You still here? I'm so sorry. Something she said made me think about something that made me remember something. Julie was sincere in her apology, surprising only herself. She suddenly found herself uncomfortable. Her mood had inexplicably been elevated for the first time in months, and she found herself laughing and enjoying the company in which she was engaging. Please, Linda, do go on. Anyway, now, where was I? A hypothetical question, which Linda was able to answer immediately. I finally called my mom down here in Florida after I had finished all the chemo and had gotten an all clean report. She stopped and, with a sarcastic grin, began to shake her head slightly. You know what her response was? Again, hypothetically, she asked and then answered. She simply said, well, that's nice, darling, that they got it all and that you're all better now. She never had, nor does she have the capacity now for compassion for anyone but herself and her own problems. Linda paused, but only to catch her breath. I swear if it had been her with breast cancer, we would have had to hear every gory detail of every single fucking exam, test, procedure, follow-up, diet restriction, or whatever. And shit if we didn't say how high when she said jump. You can be sure we would have heard about it. Linda started to laugh out loud. And she called me darling to boot. Rachel interrupted before Linda exploded completely. Hey, girl, that's why we're here. You called us, and we were all here for you, right? Again, the women took hands. Linda was flushed, her eyes pooled with tears. She finally broke and within seconds was crying fiercely. The 5 women embraced around the corner table in the bar of the Intercontinental Hotel in Miami and cried for 10 minutes together.